All right, we're diving into Module 2 with the concept of vocabulary, a critical concept for literacy and for literacy proficiency for our students. We are using as our foundational text the research base for effective vocabulary instruction for adolescents. It is a chapter within bringing literacy strategies into content instruction, which I've put the citation on this opening slide. This resource is going to be used throughout our course. It is an excellent resource to teach us not only how to teach literacy to adolescents, but how to do it in a way that is engaging and in a way that we are inclusive so that we can truly target all ability levels, not just the students who are already very literate, but some of those who perhaps struggle with some basic literacy concepts. So let's go ahead, let's dive in and get started. All right, let's quickly review our objectives. We will define the concept of vocabulary and explain its significance in the learning context, especially with respect to literacy proficiency. We will analyze the main reasons, purposes, and methods for implementing explicit and implicit vocabulary lessons. We will analyze how different vocabulary strategies are more effective for different content areas. And then we're going to look at these two main essential questions. Words have significant power. How do they impact learners' abilities to think, respond, act, and convey their learning? And how can teachers motivate and engage students to improve their vocabularies to enhance their critical thinking and learning outcomes? So I want to take a moment with this slide and I want you to pause the video and really contemplate these two questions. How do you define vocabulary? And then secondly, why is vocabulary important? So pause the slide and take a moment and contemplate your answers to these questions. All right, we have two main types of vocabulary, oral and print. Oral is for speaking and listening, and print, of course, is for reading and writing. And this is why we call these the four pillars of literacy: listening and speaking, reading and writing. They share the purposes of recognizing words and their meanings, pronouncing, understanding, and using words effectively and appropriately to foster communication and comprehension. So why is vocabulary instruction considered critical in content area classrooms, such as we have in our middle school and high school classes? It's shown a strong relationship to comprehension and students' academic success. So when students are proficient at vocabulary, they are more likely to succeed in the content area. It enhances students' ability to infer an author's intended meaning of a word in context. So this means that even without specifically knowing the definition or precisely knowing the definition of a word, they are able to use their context clues and they have enough proficiency with the other vocabulary in the challenging text that they can infer the meaning. It improves students' ability to apply knowledge of academically challenging words to understand literacy and informational passages. And it enables students to communicate more effectively through all literacy means, including reading, writing, listening, and speaking. And so essentially what this is saying is that typically when students have a stronger vocabulary, they are more proficient at all four of those pillars of literacy because they simply have more confidence and typically more practice as well. So how do students measure up when it comes to vocabulary knowledge? Unfortunately, not all students are equipped with the vocabulary necessary to do well in their content area classes or perform at acceptable levels on state and national tests. For nearly 70 years, researchers have reported a disparity among students' lexicons. High knowledge third graders have vocabularies about equal to the lowest performing 12th graders. Did you get that? Look at that statistic one more time. High knowledge third graders have vocabularies about equal to the lowest performing 12th graders. These are students who are about to graduate. High achieving high school seniors know about 4 times as many words as their classmates. The reason? Higher achieving students read more than their classmates with relatively limited vocabularies. Stanovich refers to this as the Matthew effect. The rich get richer and the poor get poorer. In other words, the more one reads, the better the vocabulary and the ability to read increasingly complex text. Over time, the knowledge gap between these two types of readers widens. Consider what this means in light of the potential 30 million word gap that we learned about last week. So we started learning about this idea. We watched the video where the seed was planted about the word gap. And I actually have an article for you to read this week about the 30 million word gap. But I want you to think about, as a high school teacher, what does this mean for you? If you know that some students are going to be coming into your class with this gap. Also, what does it mean for those students? So let's talk about why students struggle with vocabulary. This is a very complex issue, and there's really a lot more to it than this, but these are great. This is a great place to start. So, of course, it's the lack of exposure to words through reading, speaking, and listening. Lack of background knowledge related to words, and so this means experiences. So, for example, if students, let's just say, are not very well traveled, then any language or any experiences that have to do with traveling, that's going to be a real foreign concept for them. One of my favorite stories about this is some students in a very rural area that I taught in one time, who were, most of them were on free and reduced lunch. They did not have a lot of exposure outside their immediate area. They didn't do a lot of traveling. And a standardized test asked them a question about the National Mall that is in Washington, D.C. Most of my students assumed that that was talking about a large shopping center, like a mall, like Preon Lake Mall, that they're familiar with, because they really were not very well read, and they didn't have any experience with travel to Washington, D.C., and so most of them missed that question. And when we looked at it carefully, we realized that that was a biased question, and it depended on their vocabulary based on experience. And so they automatically were sort of at a disadvantage when it came to answering that question. So when we're talking about background knowledge, we mean the schema that go into building the experiences of our lives. The next one is the lack of explicit vocabulary instruction. And unfortunately, we are seeing less and less explicit vocabulary instruction in our high school classes. There are a lot of great things going on, but this is an area that's lacking, that we need to do a better job in, and we're depending on you guys to do some more direct teaching when it comes to vocabulary. The good news is the vocabulary of knowledge of adolescents can be improved with appropriate instruction. And I put one source there for you, but there are many that show that with explicit instruction and the proper support, we definitely can improve our students' vocabularies. So what is the goal of vocabulary instruction? Of course, it's to provide students with the understanding of the meaning and use of words so they can comprehend what they read, and then they can communicate effectively. According to Graves, vocabulary instruction that benefits all students at every level includes the following 4 elements, which we will examine independently. Rich and varied oral and print language experiences, instruction in individual words with multiple exposures to the words in a variety of forms, instruction in word learning strategies, and fostering word consciousness. What this means is promoting an interest in learning words and their meanings. So this is what we mean when we talk about rich and varied oral and print language experiences. Being read to, independent wide reading, teacher-guided and small group discussions. And the key is for students to indirectly learn the meanings of new words through repeated experience to hearing the word in a familiar context. And so notice that some of these should be occurring with students when they're very young, but even as they grow older, they can still benefit from these same practices in the classroom. Here's an example. One effective way to use discussion in content area classes is to elicit students' prior knowledge of concepts and words and then relate that knowledge to the new vocabulary words. Such discussion should also emphasize the important similarities and differences between the new and familiar words. In one instructional strategy, the teacher presents a central concept or vocabulary term and guides students to brainstorm related words, which are then included in a web-like graphic organizer. Teachers can use this technique across content area classes in whole or small group instruction. The next method is instruction in multiple exposures to individual words. So adolescents will encounter 10,000 or more new words each year, most of which are multisyllabic and unique to content area texts. So if you think about your specific content area, you kind of take a lot of those words for granted. However, an adolescent who's just learning that content area can be very intimidated by some of those words. They are very long. Think about a lot of our sciences, our histories, many of our music classes, actually all of our classes. They have very unique academic content specific words. We know our one or two content areas really well. They're expected to know 6 or 7 at a time. And so it can be extremely overwhelming, especially for a student who is already struggling to make sense of literacy tasks. So given the breadth of vocabulary needed for academic success in grades 4 through 12, incidental exposure through wide reading and discussion is critical. However, not all vocabulary essential to academic success can be learned through incidental exposure. Some words and their meanings should be directly taught. Because each content area has its own specialized vocabulary, domain-specific words should be carefully selected and taught explicitly and systematically. Instruction must be well planned and purposeful because most students need to encounter a word about 12 times before they know it well enough to improve their comprehension. Students with learning disabilities or those who are still learning English may require even more exposure to a word. Math and science vocabulary may need even more practice than English and social studies, or vice versa, depending on the student's particular bent. Even students who perhaps are very good at a particular performance area, such as math or music, they may have a natural talent or affinity for those areas. When it comes to the theory and the more technical part, they really may need some specialized help learning and understanding those terms and the application of those terms. So here's an example. Students should not only hear the words and copy their definitions, they should practice using the words in different forms and contexts. Peer activities 2 or 3 times a week appear to be an effective way to provide these varied practice opportunities in all content area classes. So skits, songs, jingles, which allow students to learn and apply the meaning of words. Practice activities, which allow students to apply the meaning and talk about the meaning. These are ways that we know support students in their acquisition of new vocabulary words. So the next one is instruction in word learning strategies. Teachers cannot possibly teach the meanings of all new, unfamiliar words, so they need to help students learn word meanings independently, using dictionaries to confirm and deepen knowledge of word meanings, using morphemic analysis, or that basically is just a fancy way to say analysis of word parts like prefixes and suffixes, root words, to derive word meanings, and using contextual analysis to infer word meanings. So how content teachers can make a difference in students' vocabulary knowledge is the vocabulary of academic subjects, including English language arts, seems unfamiliar and alienating compared to everyday language, especially for students from more what we consider literacy impoverished backgrounds. Content teachers can bridge the gap between students and text by explicitly addressing the language demands of their teaching and learning material. Otherwise, students will reach only a surface understanding and not the ability to use the information effectively. At this point, we're going to jump into our jam session activity using some vocabulary vignettes. Um, if you this may not be part of your exercise if you are an online student, you need to check your Moodle and see if it's present here for you. If it is present, it will be visible on the Moodle for you. If not, you will have a different activity. It kind of depends from year to year if I use this particular activity. So this is a quick recap of what you need to be checking out on Moodle. There are some additional readings and resources. So we've got a couple of good articles and a video that go into a little bit more depth to enhance your understanding of the concept of vocabulary and how important it is, especially in our very sophisticated content courses that we teach in those secondary levels. And then I want you to see Moodle for assignments. You should be starting the Literacy Strategies mini lesson this week or thereabouts, and of course your observations as well. But check Moodle. There could be some adjustments, something a little bit different, so make sure you check that out. And then please email me at lbenoit11@mcneese.edu if you have any questions. I hope you have a great week, and I hope that this content was made clear for you. Vocabulary is critical. It's very important that we provide implicit and explicit experiences for our students to learn the sophisticated vocabulary that comes with our content area.